First of all, I am not a solar or a wind expert. I am a manufacturing expert, and I've spent my career in that side of the business. However, we look at manufacturing, we look at where we can manufacture, how we can manufacture to optimize our company's stock and our shareholders' value, of course, and also, very importantly, to become a good world steward and world citizen. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the changes that Valmont has made and some of the things that we're doing, especially in the renewable space, because what I've found here in Nebraska is I've lived here 8 years. Being in charge of the international divisions before I joined utility, I realized how little people in Nebraska actually know what Valmont does globally. So everybody here, when you think of Valmont, you think of Valley, Nebraska, yeah? All right, so farmers, pivots, that's where we started. So Robert Doherty started the company in 1946, and since then, he started with the center pivot. That is our heritage. That's the home division, so to speak. So for the most part, to get a flavor of what it is to live in Nebraska and to work at Valmont, most everyone wants to start in the irrigation division. It's our culture, it's where we're from. And so it's nice to come from China, which I lived in for 8 years, to move to Nebraska and spend time with the American farmers talking about their experiences and the things that they genuinely care about. So Valmont is a very diverse global company today. If you look at where we stand, if you look at the irrigation unit by revenue, it's actually our third smallest now. Our largest is what we call the ESS group, followed by the utility group. Now, the utility group is the group that I currently lead now, and that's the stuff you're familiar with. So when we say utility group, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about transmission structures, we're talking substations, we're talking distribution poles, we're talking renewable energy. So renewable energy solutions is kind of our newest venture. We've only been doing this since 2007 was when we actually invested in the wind energy business. And then in the last few years, we talked about a solar offering that we currently have. So this is the businesses that we are currently in now. And finally, we do a lot of inspection services. We do inspection services of our own products as well as inspection services of lines, substations, and everything else. We use a lot of drones and a lot of new technology to do those inspection services. And if you talk to, all you had to do is listen to the news this morning, and you can see how important some of those inspection services come into play when it comes to reliability of grids and public safety. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Valmont and Convert Italia. So Convert Italia is our global tracker product offering. So right now, if you look at years of experience, Convert Italia has been in the renewable business and in solar for a long time. So about 35 plus years of experience. So why is that important in trackers and in solar in particular is that these guys were EPCs. These were installers, if you don't know what an EPC does. So they engineer, they procure, and then they construct. So that's the EPC acronym. So these guys have figured out real quick how to build large utility scale solar structures. In a second, I'll go through some of the projects that we've done. And the trick for us, so Valmont, as a manufacturer and as a global company, we looked across the different tracker manufacturers. We knew we wanted to put a stake in the ground on the renewable generation side of the business. And so as we scanned the available companies out there, this was the one that we felt fit us the best. So right now, their annual production capacity is about 1.35 gigawatts. Now, that's taking Valmont's manufacturing power into place. Now, the manufacturing power I'm talking about back here, manufacturing sites, we have 87 manufacturing sites in 23 different countries. Okay, so when we look at manufacturing sites, we look at renewable space globally. So the United States is obviously our home market. It's our most important market. But we also look at what's going on in the Middle East. We look at what's going on in South America. We look at geopolitical issues, tariffs, trading, supply chains. Having 87 different manufacturing facilities keeps you busy. 23 different countries, lead with 23 different leaders, and 23 different policy changes. So I will say we never have a boring day, not ever one boring day, which is, well, it's a plus and a minus. So more about Italia. So Italia is EPC, and they have projects all over the place. So if we look at our latest projects we're working on now is in Chile, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Zambia, which is always an interesting place to do business, India, Egypt, and then, of course, in the home market in Italy. So when we look at a manufacturing standpoint, you would say, well, where do you manufacture these things? Where these things are creating jobs? How do we look at the market? Well, we manufacture where it makes sense for the markets and where they're being developed. So if we have a lot of development in Nebraska, for example, the manufacturing and the steel comes from Nebraska. I mean, if you ever went out to the Valley site, has any of you guys ever been to the Valley site? Have you been on the campus there? So a lot of the pieces and parts that would go into a solar tracker can be produced right there in Valley, Nebraska. It's just really about size and scale. That's where we do the math to figure out the best and most efficient place to do it. There's a lot going on in all these different countries. It's not an easy place to just manufacture in each of the countries. You need a lot of certifications. You need a lot of work to do that. The funny thing is that United States is our last market that we're launched in. So we launched in September at the SPI show. Our U.S. product is just launching here in the United States. And so we're very excited to bring it forward, and we've got plenty of manufacturing capacity to do that. I mean, a week does not go by that we don't buy tens or even hundreds of thousands of tons of steel. And when we buy those tons of steel, it's great to integrate solar and renewable energy into that. And I'll go more into that. But this is some of our projects that we have done. So I think what's really important from a utility perspective, and the things that we bring to the party, is a lot of the solar industry, it's small and fragmented, especially on the tracker side. So you get a lot of smaller companies that are in business today and may not be in business tomorrow. It's always interesting for me to go to the SPI show every year and see who's there and who is not. Now, if you are a utility, that's not a good thing, right? So when you're buying assets for 20 to 30 years. You want to make sure that whoever sold you those assets is still around, okay? So we look at Italia. This one was one of their first ones, and that one was done in 2007. So if you want to look at tracker plants still active, this will be one of your older ones. I'm not sure how many more you'll see before then from a tracker perspective. Fixed tilt is a different product. There'll be some older ones, but in 2007, having a tracker that is working in the field and generating, we have a long track record of that, and that's one of the things that drew us to Italia. Reliability, quality, and to make sure that we're going to be there tomorrow. So if you're an investing utility, you want to make sure that there's a name behind that you can find if you have a problem. Okay, this one was Carrera Pinto, Chile in 2015. You can see that as in the Chilean desert. Lots and lots of sunlight on that one. This particular one, this one was 100 megawatts. And then this one here in Brazil, this one was fun to fly over because this is only a small picture I got through a window of a plane. It just keeps going. So this one here is, this one was 254 megawatts. And then we're working on a much larger project right now in Chile. So when it comes to utility solar, we bring scale. So when we're in Brazil, we'll bring Brazilian steel in for this. When we're in Chile, we'll bring more of a global supply. We can bring it from China, India. We can bring actuators from Italy. We can bring modules from China. We can bring modules. I think these particular modules were brought from Canada. So the supply chain is diverse so that we can get the best price to the customer and be competitive. And this is brand new from GTM. GTM research is talking about kind of the trends. And for us, this is why we invested in tracker technology. So when it came to fixed tilt, we didn't really bring anything to the party. We have a lot of engineers. We have a lot of manufacturing potential, but a lot of mom and pop shops can do a lot of the fixed tilt. So what we decided to do was to really invest more in the technology side of the business to make sure we can actually bring value to the product. So you can see here, so the global PV tracker market has got some pretty significant growth. And then so it will account for 43 of global ground mount by 2024. So this is brand new from GTM, just a few days old. Now GTM, they do a lot of the tracking of the trends. Here, I'm gonna pull this off. All right, there we go. So this is important for us. Obviously, it's important to know where we're gonna spend our time and our engineering resources. But we're pretty happy with where we're going. We've got great people, and if you actually want someone who really knows about solar, there's Jay Johnson sitting right over there. He's my minder to make sure that I don't, say anything that isn't true. So, but the things I would like to talk about is some of our other stuff we do, and you may not know this, but we are also a large producer of offshore wind. This is in Denmark. So we produce a tremendous amount of offshore wind towers. So when you talk about some of these towers here, this is creating a rotor house where the wind turbines go in there. And the new generation of turbines are almost 12 meters in diameter. To give you an idea of how big these things are. All right, so that's over 36 feet. So these are very, very large structures. You can see the offshore wind is a big business in the north. Now, in Nebraska, obviously, you guys aren't terribly interested here in offshore wind. I get it. But I think it's also important to understand this is the capabilities that Valmont can bring. Now, onshore wind, we don't do a lot of onshore wind. It's an economic decision on our part. But if you look at what's happening in the Northeast and some possibilities in the Northwest, obviously for us is a very interesting business. It is very interesting to watch these guys work because it is so enormous. And the factory is really, really spectacular. And we look at the market for offshore wind. And so this number down here is the United States, which is right now they're estimating about 13.2 gigawatts. Almost all of that is in the Northeast. Okay. Now, because we don't really follow onshore wind, those numbers are well known and well published. But you can see at the very top who's the leader up there in Asia Pac. Well, you see China, right? China at 39.9 gigawatts. So China, and we'll talk a little bit about China coming up here as I take a step back. China is a massive consumer of energy, okay? And so that's kind of where we stand here. And so this is what I want to talk about a little bit more in depth, is energy and where we stand in energy. So at the end of the day, Valmont Utility, all we do is we generate a small amount of energy, but we really are in the business of moving it and making sure it's useful. And here on this earth, we are clever human beings. Clever human beings, we have found a way to harness energy. And we found a way to harness energy for a long time. It started with wood. So wood yields still about 14 megajoules per kilogram. I'm sorry about the metric stuff, but it's still the easiest way to explain things. I'm an engineer at heart, and I still end up with metric. But the numbers are relative, so it's important to understand. So we started with wood as our energy source. And we found out that if we can cook things, if we can use wood to keep us warm, we thrive. And not only we thrive, we can change the environment about us. And so human beings, as a species, spread around the earth. And we became the new apex species of the earth because our ability to harness energy. And by the way, still 2 billion people today are still using wood as an energy source. 2 billion. That is a massive number of people that still haven't moved up that energy chain. Next, coal. Coal was 32 megajoules per kilogram. So once we found coal, then we really had an energy explosion. And that explosion led to amazing amounts of surplus. So we talked about a lot of people. How many here are farmers or were farmers or associated? Oh, not that many. Usually we have more of a farming crowd. So the hunter and gatherers, generally speaking, there's one hunter and gatherer can live about, the carrying capacity of that land was about 1 square mile, could support one person. Now the farmers came along, they started raising livestock and farmers, and they increased that tenfold. So now you had 10 people that could live within that. And now in a place like Hong Kong, for example, once energy was discovered in Hong Kong, which is a city you may be familiar with. If you've ever been there, it's quite a city. I think there's about 17,000. So as a species, the only way we got from 1 to 17,000 plus was this, energy. And the fact that we were able to use that much energy. And in fact, this one, I always thought this was a fascinating statistic. Now we found oil. You remember Beverly Hillbillies, right? Shot the shotgun in the ground, the oil came bubbling up, right? So, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, billionaires were made. They were made from finding that next energy source. They came from coal to oil. And that's where the big energy was. And that's where the big surplus started for human beings. And now, 1 barrel of oil is equivalent of one person working 8 hours a day for 4.5 years. So that is a tremendous amount of energy. So guess what, average American, how many barrels of oil an average American uses? Any guesses? Anybody? Just wild guess. What do you think? 10? Closer? Go up. 60. That's on average. Now, if you're living the jet-setting lifestyle, it's a lot more, right? So on average, an American uses 60 barrels of oil. So the amount of energy that this has unlocked for us compared to when we were digging in trenches or building pyramids, and if you think about the amount of power it took to get there, I mean, what's your average, truck or tractor these days? 400 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower? So when you're talking about this amount of energy and energy surplus, it's stunning, right? And so where all this energy come from? All of it came from fossil fuels. All of it did. With very rare exceptions today, we are pulling all of it from our fossil fuel energy supply. And where did these fossil fuels come from? They came from living sources millions of years ago, right? Compressed, condensed, put into the earth. So whether you're burning coal, wood, or anything else, that's where all of our surplus, all of our success as a species and as humans come from that. And so when you think about how critically important that is, it's amazing. And then you stop and think about what it really, all of the oil that's under the ground, all these fossil fuels, it's just a battery. It's a giant earth battery that we are pulling from right now, right? And so that is the world we live in today. Massive amounts of energy that we've been blessed with, and we use that energy to grow our society. Now this leads to a few new issues. So urban migration is one, and that's a picture that we took in China. So in just China alone, I lived in Asia for 12 years. So I personally witnessed massive changes in people's behavior. So you had China that when I first went there in the early 90s was an agrarian society. Small plots of land. Think about Nebraska filled with, 600 million, the United States was 600 million people. So it is a massive change. About 200 to 300 million people, it is estimated, moved from the fields to the cities. All right, and it created all the problems that came along with it, right? Congestion, you've got impacts on fluid supply, and so the energy it took to live off the land versus the energy it takes to actually bring all of that food to feed 200 to 300 million people took tremendous amounts of energy. And that's where we're pulling from now. And of course, there's environmental impacts with that, any way you look at it. Science is not always right. Science can sometimes be wrong, but the science is fairly clear that there is massive environmental impacts, and we can look around to that movement. The last climate warming took roughly about 5,000 years. That's in the geological record. This one looks to be taking about 100. So how we adapt to this and how we change those energy needs is a tricky thing. But finally, and most importantly, the fuel in the earth is a battery, and it's a gift. And it will take energy to transition to energy. We will have to pay for the new transition. So when we look at our strategy at Valmont, we're not saying, hey, fossil fuels are a horrible, terrible thing. What we're saying is we need to leverage what we have and what human ingenuity has brought us to move to a new kind of generation. And the generation that really, as the history of our species, we have not quite seen before. Most of the fossil fuels that we're pulling from was built on solar energy millions of years ago. So the question is how we use our energy resources to transition, and not necessarily to vilify. The issues that I have today is, we have a lot of alarmists on the environmental side. I think what is more constructive is to talk about human ingenuity and how to use that battery to move forward into the next generations. And I think that's what's so critical about what we're doing here. What Valmont's trying to do as a company is to talk about the real challenges facing this transformation. Understand that we have to pay in energy, what we're doing now, to get a new type of energy that is renewable and sustainable, because it's not that oil is getting more expensive. Usually now it's getting cheaper, right? It's only that it's getting harder to reach and getting more expensive to look at on a net energy basis. So using that energy to pay for energy is important. And it's important from a Valmont manufacturing perspective. We understand that. We invest in new technologies to make sure that we can be a part of an energy transformation, and fully understanding that a lot of our business still is coming from those fossil fuels, but making sure that we invest in that next move. And so what you are doing here today and what we're doing here globally is critically important, and developing that technology to move to the next step. Finally, this was a saying in World War II of the Army Corps of Engineers. And my grandfather was in the Army Corps back then, so I always try to end my message with this from their motto of the Army Corps of Engineers, like, the difficult we do today, and what you're doing today is difficult, and the impossible, which is that sustainable future, will take a little longer. We understand that. Rational people understand that. But it's important to keep the long term in sight. And that's my message. That's all I got for you. I mean, I can keep talking, but I think I'll call it good. But right now I can take questions and answers. Anything you may want to know about Valmont, some of our global initiatives, or any of our thinking on what's going on around the world or here in Nebraska. So I'll take any questions.
What's the schedule or status for deploying the solar tracker for the first project under Valmont umbrella now?
Well, Jay here, we just actually are working on our first project now on the engineering wise, and we should see it next year. So we'll have, in the United States, we'll have a project here and working here in the United States next year. And the manufacturing supply chain for that is being set up now. That's the most interesting part of this. So with a lot of policy changes, we have multiple manufacturing sites in China we just don't use anymore. Redirect most of that supply chain to other places. So now we look at what the best supply chain is, whether that be here in Valley, Nebraska for galvanizing, whether it be for omega channels, saddles, torque tubes. So we'll look at where the projects are, and then we'll set up our supply chains to match those projects. And so what we generally do is I'll look at a cluster densification chart, and I'll say, okay, so in the next 3-4 years, how many projects are in each place? And then usually we'll look at manufacturing to be close logistically to those areas. Yeah?
What are some of the barriers that you see to establishing renewable manufacturing sites in Nebraska?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously incentives help, and, labor availability helps. Depending on so what we found here, so for example, welders, something as simple as that. The trades and people wanting to go into the trades has been a big issue. For whatever reason, even if you offer to train welders, sometimes you don't get the welders. And really, availability of labor is critically important. So what we run into in a lot of places is that we just can't get the people. So right now, Valmont Utility, we're in a massive capacity crunch. And most of our issue is we cannot hire enough people that are trained, that actually know the manufacturing trades at all, whether it be quality, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be basic machining, just the very basics. That is one of our biggest issues right now. And anything we can do to open the trades and the training. We're not talking 4-year engineering degrees here. We're talking 1 year or even 6 months of training is critically important for us.
I'm just curious why you think that might be, because I know other industries in Nebraska can struggle with finding that type of labor.
Yeah.
And has Valmont explored more of an outreach program to try to reach some of the high school students that could become, manufacturing?
Yeah, from a community relations, I know we've worked a lot more in Texas than we have specifically in Nebraska, just because we had more manufacturing there. But I know in Valley, even still, Valley, Nebraska, and Columbus specifically, I know Columbus is very ingrained more with the community there. And I think that it's not necessarily just a Nebraska problem. Look, this is a United States problem where there's a lot of people in the trades that it's not desirable to go and weld for 8 hours a day. I mean, from a desirability of a career, you don't have people raising their hands really quick for that, and especially with the new generation doesn't necessarily want to do that. It does help to have semi-automation. So we can say, look, I'm going to have you work with a robot to do it. That helps. They're more interested in that technology aspect of it. So as we modernize the factory floor, it's easier. So, but to have someone hand welding or hand cutting, or arc welding or the rest of it, it's still not an easy way to do it. And it's a good wage and good incentives. So, but we do need to have trained people. It's not, the issue is there's a lot of standards when it comes, especially to utility and primary infrastructure. You have got to know how to weld. You can't just go off on the line and then be cranking on this stuff, and then quality problems are a serious issue if you don't have good welders. It is a skill. It is a trade skill, and one that takes time to develop.
Joe had a question.
Yeah, does Valmont have any kind of package center pivot solar power at all?
Yeah, not in the U.S. Actually, in Brazil we do. It's been a lot more popular on that side, where package pump, solar package with it, and batteries with it as well. The U.S., there just hasn't been a big demand so far, but I do believe you're going to find a lot more of that in the coming years, where it'll actually be offered by the dealers as a package deal.
Can you tell us the story we talked about earlier about Katana Summit?
Yeah, so you guys have heard Katana Summit, the wind blade manufacturer. So wind's a tough business from a manufacturing standpoint. If you go and talk to the manufacturers today to say, hey, wind was booming in the last, 5 years. And if you went and talked to the big manufacturers of wind, you'd say, how you doing? They'd say, oh, we're doing okay. Because they're large structures, very difficult to transport. If you talk to the EPCs putting in wind, I think they'll say we're doing a lot better. So there was a lot of price pressure on that, and Katana was a victim of that price pressure, and they couldn't survive in the market. So Valmont actually bought the Katana facility, and that's the one that's our facility in Columbus, Nebraska today. And then we turned that facility in from making the blades into making structures and towers and substations. So we do prefabricated substations. That means basically making substations instead of out in the field. We do a lot of the topside buses there, and then we do large structures, so a lot of monopole structures that you'll see there going onto the grids. And those, Columbus and Valley are fantastic manufacturing sites, because if you draw a circle around them, you can hit most of the big major areas and a lot of our large customers pretty easily. So, and Columbus is doing very well, and in fact, they're hiring. So, they've grown quite a bit since we took them over to Katana, but we took them out of wind and brought them into the structure space. And that's a far more profitable space.
Listen, thank you very much. It's been great having you, and thanks for
Yeah,
being
thanks,
here.
John. Thank you.
Yeah.